right, well, as some of you know, I'm Jennifer Rothman. I'm a professor here at Penn, and I'm very excited to introduce our guest, Orly Lobel, and her new book, The Equality Machine, which I meant to bring up to the podium. I've also been told that I have a few housekeeping announcements, and so I feel like I have handlers who have sent me this note, which tell me, first of all, we're being recorded. So you should know that. You are not on camera, people out there, but your voices could be picked up. And for those who are attending virtually, there are a bunch of people on Zoom and who have registered to get CLE credit. Code words will appear on the Zoom screen multiple times, and apparently you should make note of them on your CLE form. So without further ado, I would like to welcome our guest for today, Orly Lobel, who's an award-winning author, university professor, and the Warren Distinguished Professor of Law at the University of San Diego. She's the director of the Program of Employment and Labor Law, and her work in that field has been particularly influential. She's one of the people I turn to on labor and employment issues, and have read her host of both articles, of which there are numerous, but also she has two previous books, You Don't Own Me, How Mattel versus MGA Entertainment Exposed Barbie's Dark Side, which actually has been optioned for a film, which you wouldn't necessarily think legal writing is going to be of this nature and be made into a movie, but this one will, with lots of industry intrigue. And then she also wrote Talent Wants to Be Free, Why We Should Learn to Love Leaks, Raids, and Free Writing. This is a book I commend to you. And then this is her latest book, which has been getting a series of rave reviews, which she sent some of them to me late last night, and I didn't have time to incorporate them all into my comments, except to say that it's universally well-liked and is a very easy read about a really important topic, which is to shift our way of thinking from the dystopian collapse of society based on technology and AI, and to suggest both its opportunity for positive change and also whether we like it or not is here, and so why not try to turn it into a force of good. Professor Lobel is also a graduate of Tel Aviv University, Harvard Law School. She clerked on the Israeli Supreme Court, so also has an international perspective on many of these issues, and is a member of the American Law Institute, which is headquartered here in Philly. So I will welcome you, and she's going to talk about her book for a little bit, then we're going to have a conversation between the two of us, and then we'll open it up to your questions, and I think we may be able to field questions from the Zoom room that you'll throw off. Great. All right.
Thank you, Jennifer. That was a lovely introduction, and I have to say that this is the first of several book tour kind of events that are scheduled in the next few weeks, and it's really the most special to me for a variety of reasons. So the book came out 2 days ago, and I am so grateful to both Jennifer and to Elizabeth, who's right there, who suggested immediately that I come here to Penn, to Philadelphia, to talk about this book. And I remember, I've learned so much from both of you, and I remember the last time we were talking books, it was really a little bit before COVID, where Jen and I had a joint book event for You Don't Own Me, which actually, Jen is being modest, she helped me think through the rights to publicity and persona for the characters in You Don't Own Me. But it was a book event also for Jennifer's book, The Right to Publicity, which I've learned so much about or from, and been inspired to continue research and writing, and then bringing it out to the broader audience and shifting public debates and shifting policy agendas and thinking about impact from the law school in the world and nationally and internationally. So Penn is also, I'm really grateful to a lot of people here, and beyond these two amazing faculty members here, in helping me think through the ideas for The Equality Machine when I was just writing it, thinking, researching. I had advanced praise from people here, Adam Grant, Angela Duckworth, Jonah Berger, and many others from Wharton and Penn Law who really have been influential in my own thinking. Now this book is deeply personal to me, and I feel like it will be deeply personal to each and every one of us. It really takes us on a tour of what we've been thinking about, how we've been thinking about technology in every aspect of our life, and maybe being open to rethinking and reimagining how it is shaping and can shape every aspect of our life. So the chapters, there are 10 chapters that take us through our work relations, employment, jobs, and then our social online interactions, political activism, media and culture, and then through health and medicine and care. And finally, it goes into our very intimate lives, our home lives, our domestic relations, and our dating, online apps, our sex lives. There's a whole chapter about sex with robots, and maybe we can rethink that from a feminist perspective, from an equality perspective, a subversive, anti-stereotypical, being open to everything that we can reimagine with the help of new capabilities, automation, AI. And the reason I wrote this book in particular was that when I say pivot the conversation, that the past few years have really been, there's been this dominant story about how we should fear and we should be skeptical and all these warnings about what technology is doing to our lives, our inclusion, our rights, and so the kind of bestsellers that have shaped the public imagination and also the policy debates that we will probably talk about, and I'll talk about a little bit, they have titles like Weapons of Math Destruction, Automating Inequality, Algorithmic Exclusion, Bias, The New Jim Code, Surveillance Capitalism, Technically Wrong. There have been also like movies like The Social Dilemma that are very alarmist about how privacy is excluding, automation is excluding and infringing upon our privacy and extracting our data for harm, for manipulation. And the book really, it's not trying to deny that there are risks, but it's trying to, and I think it does, provide a much fuller picture and a much more balanced vision and research about what is actually happening. And one of the things that I really call for and call all of us to do is think comparatively. Like the status quo, their offline worlds, and all the historical and ongoing wrongs and exclusions and inequities versus what we are seeing right now, what are our capabilities, what we can introduce into our lives that can actually be progress, be something that continues our normative commitments, our values, and takes us forward. And I said that the book is very personal. I want to read really probably just the first line of the introduction to the book. And this line is, I have 3 girls, the middle one is bionic. And really, for me, there's a lot of personal at the beginning and then throughout in some ways. Thinking about my family and how much it has benefited from technology and automation. My bionic daughter wears an insulin pump and a continuous glucose monitor, CGM. She has type 1 diabetes since she was 13. And it now has, for the first time ever, because it was FDA approved last year, it has machine learning in it, an automated system that makes its own decisions about correcting for glucose levels. And this is only getting better through data collection, data sharing, data extraction, and the computational powers that come with the accuracy and the capabilities of our digital technologies that are really clearly outperforming the human decision making in various aspects, in many ways, of accuracy and consistency, and granularity and personalization. So that's just one story about health, and there's so many others, and I interview amazing leaders who actually have been frustrated similarly to me and other people in the tech policy world. So I interview people from computer science, from machine learning, kind of cutting edge research, and at universities and the private markets that are really thinking about their innovations with an eye for good and for change and for equality. And there's a lot of misconceptions and inaccuracies about how we perceive, how we assess, and how we talk about AI today. So this is really kind of my contribution to pivoting the debates. And I want to just give you perhaps 3 more examples very briefly, and then we can shift to conversation from areas that I've researched and are near and dear to my heart. So first, the area that I most work in, and I've been teaching for a couple of decades now, employment relations and the workplace. There has been numerous law review articles about, oh no, employers are introducing resume parsing, automated processes of screening for the best employees. That's all going to be, our equality is going down the drain. We know that algorithms have sometimes been biased. They're replicating historical wrongs. And one of the things that I show in the book is that the same stories are replicated by the media, by journalists, by policy reports, and there's not a lot of attention of what actually happened in that story and where we are now. So there's a story about the Amazon kind of initial attempt to automate this process of resume screening and getting the best employees. And they used what is called in the machine learning world automated exploitation, which is just looking at past data, who were successful employees in the past, and getting that's the training data that the algorithm learns from and then replicates. And indeed, it turned out that algorithm was suggesting that white men were doing the best as Amazon engineers. What's not told in this story is this algorithm was never deployed because Amazon was very careful about testing it, and you have this digital paper trail where you can audit what are the outcomes. And then there have been super advances. We now think of the gold standard. We kind of, especially not really me, people who are programming these software, as not being exploitation of past successes in the hiring world, but it's called exploration, algorithmic exploration, where you tell the algorithm to think about qualities, about things that are kind of outside the box of personality traits that are more equally distributed among different identities. And it comes up with its own methods of sorting. And again, you have these continuous checks on whether the algorithm is fair and is producing more inclusive results. And the other aspect that's not being told, and when we look at these shifts to automation and technological sorting in the workplace, is how bad things have been in the past with hiring. With I do a lot of expert witness stuff in employment discrimination and talent mobility, and how stagnant and frustratingly so these aspects of diversity in different industries, in hiring, in promotion, in pay equity is an area that I've researched a lot. And I show how there's a lot of cultural norms and shifts in our mindset that can happen when we have the availability of, for example, third-party platforms where we can actually share our salary information and crowdsource it so that people actually know what they're worth. That's actually an app, Know Your Worth. And we can reverse that control over information and data that used to be very much concentrated with, within employers or companies. Employers had that information of how much they pay, the salary scale, and people, especially women and people of color, who have been historically underpaid, and the pay gap has been frustratingly stagnant and staying with a component of discrimination. We can close that with much more information, much more data. So work is one example where I go through a lot of the different stages and kind of really surprising results of, for example, companies that are knowing exactly, or through their machine learning technologies, can see what kind of formatting even and words and fonts for job ads will create more inclusion, more applicants that are more diverse, versus other kinds of just ads that will be skewed and maybe create some resistance by certain applicants in applying. And the second example, I've already talked about health, and there's been tremendous leaps in using digital technology to find cures. I mean, I think people understand that intuitively, that we've been using, it used to be kind of Watson playing trivia, but now it's really Watson for oncology. And I describe, again, personal stories of researchers. So there's a researcher from MIT, Regina Barzilai, who I interviewed for the book, who was really using machine learning for something kind of esoteric, like she was researching dormant languages and how they can be deciphered through Semitic languages that are still active, and she was applying, her CS competence to that field. But then, really at a pretty young age, she is diagnosed with breast cancer, and she realizes that the annual mammogram, 2 annual mammograms in previous years had missed the screening and missed the diagnosis of having an initial small tumor. And she returns. She's thankfully healthy, cancer-free. She returns to MIT and says, we apply all these capabilities to marketing and to all sorts of areas, but we've really underplayed the potential in health and also access to health. Because one of the things that was really frustrating to me is that I mentioned that we don't talk enough about comparative advantage, compared to what? Compared to the offline world in hiring, comparing the resume parsing to human decision making and all the biases that we come with, conscious and unconscious. But also, I see in the health world where, so Regina Barzilai develops a automated mammogram screening, breast cancer screening. She also then turns to a lot of other areas of health and has been really collaborating with leading institutions. Mass General uses her technology and other hospitals. But there's these reports about, oh, this bot that's screening, that's a a bot radiologist is pretty comparable to two expert radiologists that together look at an image, or maybe in some tests it's either comparable or it just slightly outperforms or it slightly underperforms. But what we really also have to think about in terms of global justice, global equity, is that most people don't have two expert radiologists that are going to look at, in a timely manner at all of their imaging. And so we also need to really include these costs and the access and the scaling and the spread and the continuous improvement through data. And I keep emphasizing data because I'm going to say something, and we might say something about privacy, that aspect of we're so afraid of, data extraction, and I think there's a tension there. So that's a second area of health. And then I'll just close with a couple of C's, and then I want to hear from everybody. But another area that I think is similarly being or can be revolutionized is the area of education. And again, that same dynamic of thinking about underprivileged schools, under-resourced areas, and actually another MIT scientist whose work I celebrate in the book, Cynthia Brazel, who was one of the first computer scientists who developed social robots, so robots that really interact with you and understanding people, kids, also behaviorally. And this technology uses that, very scary in the eyes of the media technology that's called facial recognition and emotional recognition, and it really learns. And I went to presentations with these cute, fluffy Sesame Street-like robots that are helping teachers and to interact as companion tutors with kids, and very personalized, and it learns from the kids. And when actually, probably this was one of the triggers of initially writing a book about this, when I debated these issues with the ACLU. The ACLU has been kind of on a mission to ban facial recognition, and there's all these fears of, companies are giving free iPads to kids in underprivileged schools because they want to get all their data. And what I call for is having a more nuanced conversation of what is that data used for? What is this harm that we fear? And again, there sometimes will be harms. There are risks. It's not that that we want to deny those, but we want to protect against those harms, and we want to also continue to learn and have fuller information. And really, that's the dream of all of it. I mean, I'm sure you're taught in law school, and we all taught what makes markets more competitive, better, more accurate, more rational is having more information and being able to process it rationally. So I could tell a lot more stories that are in the book about many other aspects, like using AI in law enforcement and trafficking and many other areas. But I will end with this for this part, and I look forward to our conversation, Jen.
Right. You don't want to say too much because you want people to read the book.
Right, exactly.
So I have many substantive questions, but I want to ask sort of like a framing question about the book to start. And maybe I'll preface that by just saying that, just to highlight some of the things that are important from what you said and in the book, which is that we have like this very simplistic narrative going on about all the parade of terrible dystopian things that are flowing from technology right now. And some of them are real, I'll say, and we'll talk more about them. But you're really trying to shed a light on some positive aspects. And so hopefully in our conversation we think about how we can move maybe more in that direction. And I really love this like language and concept in the book about having a great reboot, so that we don't just have sort of the technological sort of stay on our current path of technological development, but we can try to shift it and harness its power sort of for good, maybe rather than evil or unthinking negative outcomes. But what I want to start with is I very nicely got a review copy, which you can thank your publisher for, and on it says feminist machine, not the equality machine. And so I was really curious about that. Like, was that an original title? And as I read the book, it seemed very focused on gender equality, and though not exclusively, but that seemed like more the focus of the book. And so it's sort of like a framing of the book, but also like a sort of inside baseball publishing world thing. So I was just curious about that.
Yeah, so there were many titles, and as you know, that's part of the fun of writing a book. Many titles, many book covers, and initially, you're right, because I had chapters that are called. One chapter is called Algorithms of Desire, about dating apps, and one is about domestic relations and bringing robots into our home. And I actually talk about cultural differences, like why is Japan and Japanese culture and South Korea actually more advanced than us in thinking about changing marital relations through and helping work-family balance through bringing a humanoid robot that will fold our laundry for us and maybe care for babies, put diapers, and just like kind of everybody needs a wife kind of thing, and then also a chapter about sex robots, and I look at a lot of the stereotypes that are coming out. But actually, that was at the initial stages, and as I started researching more, it was clear to me. I mean, all along I wanted to think about racial equality and ethnicity and cultural differences, as I said, global justice, like I mentioned, with health and access and education, and I very much wanted it to be about equality and opening up, because this is, as exactly your framing is right, because this is really about opening our minds and pivoting and rebooting to the future, and it's not just about what is, but what can be. I think it really is about thinking about all our identities and rethinking our identities with, like, even, when I think about, I have this whole discussion about why we need humanoid robots. Like, why do we even need to make them in our image? Our online existence can actually be very subversive of, like, taking away a lot of our vulnerabilities and empowering us to reimagine, what we can be. And so all along I think of technology as a tool. I think you're absolutely right. There are harms, there are risks, there are wrongs, that are also, some are not real in the conversation, as I very much emphasize, but some are. But there's so much potential opportunity, there's so much that's right, and we need to ask those questions together, what's wrong and what's right, in order to move us forward.
Great. you didn't in your initial comments talk about the eBay story, and I'm wondering if you could just share a little bit about that, and then maybe we could dig a little deeper into it.
Yeah, the eBay story is actually an Israeli story. Two Israeli researchers, Tadi Legev, and a law professor, Tami Katz, who got initial data, or the first time really, that a platform at the level of eBay opened up millions of data points of exchanges of auctions that happened on the platform for many years, and they could really research this question of what does gender have to do, or does gender matter when people are exchanging or selling completely identical products. And you can do that on eBay, looking at like gift cards or unused like iPhones or Apple Watches that are clearly identical, and then just look at whether there's a gender effect, whether we're still at the 80 cents to the dollar like in the offline market, and their results are really striking in that there is a gender effect. There is a gender discounting in the bids that get that women get for identical products. And so that is an example to me, not as, you can tell this story in different ways, right? Like, so you have the data right now, like we have these striking results. You can tell this story of like, oh, platforms are evil, look what's happening on platforms. Or you can say, we have all these, I don't know if some of you may have heard of, I think it was Ian Ayres who did this many years ago. Ian Ayres, a law professor at Yale, did an experiment in like the offline world of going to used car shops, and like if you're entering as a person of color or as a woman, you get like a completely different price and offer than if you're a white man, and so of course we have these discriminatory exchanges in markets everywhere, but to do that experiment with used cars, it takes so much energy, like resources to do it, and you're just doing it with like one shop maybe, or just a one-shot thing. It's and you can't really change it. I mean, what are you gonna do? Are you gonna tackle all of these like all around the world? But platforms, and this is actually it's an initial story because it goes into a lot of the work that I've been doing with platforms, what I've been seeing. I'm actually the academic policy consultant on a public platform, Fiverr, that is the largest marketplace today of online services. And I've worked with them on content moderation and originality policies and child safety and many other areas. And they, I think, and I want to hear what all of you think, but I've seen, the motivations of a company like eBay is to rationalize processes and to get valuation right, and to bring back people on their platform, and they're interested in these kinds of findings. I have similar stories about Airbnb and other, like Uber and other companies. And there are ways to tweak the platforms that don't exist offline. And then there's a way to track and check whether, to run all of these experiments, that, what are the best designs, what are the best, how to direct both human decision making on the digital world and improve the algorithms such that we're moving toward equality.
One of the reasons I wanted to highlight the eBay story is because I think it's very accessible for the platforms, for people to understand, and a really documented case. So they make a convincing case about data aggregation, and that can be very revealing. And at least some people at the platforms are interested in your suggestions of ways to improve things. But they are private platforms, so they don't have to do that. And so, and to the extent that the technology presents these opportunities to maximize or improve equality, rather than simply document the failure of equality. It could potentially conflict with profit motives, or requires, even if it doesn't, requires an investment commitment to doing so. So I'm curious, it sounds like you are engaging with some platforms that care and are trying to make these shifts, but are there limitations to the likely success of those moves, given the private nature of the platforms?
Yes, and I think that's the most important question from a policy perspective. What can happen through market corrections, through private will of corporations, and what needs intervention, what needs policy changes. One policy change that can be made and passed are requirements about disclosure of these this kind of data. So I've actually written, and it's in the book, but I've written a separate short paper in the Notre Dame Law Review about data scraping and how we need to make clear that that's something that's allowable for research, for policymakers to experiment on platforms, conduct these kinds of experimentation, and also have access to data that you're absolutely right, a lot of platforms, most platforms deem proprietary these days. There are other kinds of reforms like the EOC now, for the first time ever, is requiring companies to reveal or to disclose their gender and race pay scales, or their salary data. And again, I think with salaries, I really believe, and I'm on this board of an alliance, the Pay Equity Alliance, where there's really industry leaders like Nordstrom and PayScale or NerdWallet and other leaders, Adobe, that really are interested in rationalizing and valuing people as they ought to be, and correcting gender and race pay gaps within these companies. But it's not going to be enough. So I think the book brought me back to some of the work that I've done early on new governance. I know Yael here in the audience is also thinking about these things, about private and public collaborations, thinking about regulatory pyramids, what can be done, ideally through having the right conversations in the private market first, initially, and then figuring out what's not enough, and where we need the bigger guns of public regulation, but also not just guns, but kind of not just the kind of command and control, but also incentives and highlighting best practices, and just helping private markets sort what we call the snake oil AI from the really promising software that can help us do the right thing.
Yeah, so one of the things that I really liked about the book were the optimistic opportunities and sort of giving tools to companies to really focus on this. But the pessimist in me is skeptical about the adoption of some of these, and so I think it's really important to put it together. This is how these tools could be employed to harness these technologies to make things better. And I guess I'm going to push you during before we open things up a little bit about your thoughts about what we can do about some of the darker side, because you frame things as this is a comparison, right? So is this worse? Like, is the discrimination we're seeing online and in these platforms worse than what we're seeing in the real world? And the answer is no. They are reflective of it. But there's some other instances in which some of the online technology is creating new problems that are concerning. So I think one that's probably on people's minds is, right, misinformation and fake news. And you mentioned potential government regulation if the platforms don't take action themselves. But of course, then we have the First Amendment as this big potential limitation on what we tell the platforms to do. And so I'm just curious what, if any, ideas you have about how to combat that.
Yeah. So first of all, it's good that you're pushing me because the whole point of the book is to say, if we're not going to ask these questions, like what can we do, well, all we get in terms of the policy agenda that's right now on the table is very reactive and protective. And I highlight how really because of the stories about the fear and the risk and not the sorting and kind of redirecting, I show how the dominant, two dominant reforms, both the EU, across the pond, the EU has actually been more advanced and just a little, a few steps forward in terms of AI regulation. They have an EU AI draft, and they passed the GDPR a couple of years ago, which is also about automation, actually. And then the reforms that are before Congress now, and the Biden administration just a couple of weeks ago, after the book came out with their announcement about an AI Bill of Rights, and all of it is it's exactly what I'm arguing against, which is it's just protective and just kind of like the do not without the what to actually do. So the two primary things are one, a right to opt out of automation. That's actually in the GDPR. That will be in the EU draft or the EU AI Act. That's before Congress and in the Bill of Rights of a right to. It's also in the California privacy law. A right to know that you're interacting with a bot and to opt out of that, automated decision making, as though that's going to solve things, and that's automation is per se something that is harmful, and not contemplating something more balanced and understanding what when it's going well, and when it's going better actually than the human status quo decision making. And then the other thing is the privacy stuff, and in the GDPR, the term is data minimization. Those are the default reforms, and we need much fuller kinds of reforms, like sharing information. And on the content moderation or the kind of online harms, I actually have a full separate paper that I'm happy to share with people. I shared it with Elizabeth, where I very much critique an FTC report that was asked to look exactly at those questions of how can we use automation to tackle online harms like fake news, like deep fakes of fake pornographic images, revenge porn, and all they do in the report is kind of rehash the fact that they say the technology is still rudimentary, so we ask Congress to do nothing because we don't know, there's some inaccuracies. And what I'm saying is, I'm not going to solve all of the, all of these questions and all of the aspects of our lives, and especially not because the technology is all the time improving and there's so much of it. In the book, and I'm saying it's should be the role, even though the public agencies are not thinking of themselves in that role. It should be the role of government to help us figure out how to redirect and sort things out, and when do we need, and that it's much more than the binary, either do nothing or the Biden administration has been saying, repeal, revoke. Now they've changed a little bit to reform Section 230 of the Computer Act of complete immunity on content moderation. Those are the two options. No, what I see with my interactions with Fiverr and other companies, they aren't. It's always a combination of automation and human moderators. There's lots of things that they're doing, lots more than just removal from blocking something from an online, from a platform versus allowing it to stay. There's lots more things and collaborations with NGOs on safety, on trafficking, and we need to really talk about what are the best practices, what works, what doesn't, and that is a role for law.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much, we could probably talk for a long time about all the ideas in the book, and also some of the challenges, right, for trying to get us to move into a more proactive view of using technology to improve things rather than just, as you say, playing defense. But in our limited time together, I want to make sure that people have an opportunity to ask you, our guest author, questions.
Thank you so much for speaking with us today. My question has two parts. The first part is you're really recommending the importance of this nuanced approach to these conversations. My question is, I'd love to hear more about what you feel is at stake if our conversations aren't capturing this nuance on both the potential positives and negatives of technology. And then the second part of that question is, what do you think are practical steps that we could take to continue the conversation in this vein after the book, beyond the book, where technological spaces are likely far too utopic of the work that they're doing, and lay spaces might be far too critical. How can we kind of keep the conversation going beyond this?
Great, that's a great framing and moving this to what I really care about, and I talk about this in the book, where what happens when we're just kind of keeping that conversation of, on the one hand, Silicon Valley, like from the center, we get like all these very utopian, and I actually went, part of the research of the book was I mentioned to you all these titles of like the alarmist titles of bestsellers about like the bad things about technology and the why we should fear automation. And there's all these, I went also to all these AI books that were coming out by leaders like, the kind of Elon Musks and others of Silicon Valley. And I, like, one of the things that I did initially as a research, I went to all their indexes and I looked, is there race in the index? Is there women? And and it was like very, just a bifurcated debate where the insiders were people who were celebrating this technology just as like leaps in the technology, like how strong it is, how much data it can process, and how much it can replace humans in fast ways, but really weren't interested in this lens of equality. And then the people that are interested in equality are kind of from the outside critiquing without engaging in constructive, cautiously optimistic, which I'm sure I can pull Jen into, debate. And what happens is it really replicates that, we always say like Silicon Valley has like a bro culture, like, non-diversity world, just like, and I really see like, who is gonna go into fields that are so groundbreaking, like, the field of Regina, but like MIT scientists who are doing machine learning. If all the stories are negative, it really is not lending itself for like, people who really care. And I think many people care, including many white men, about, doing the right thing, about AI ethics. And they're kind of leaving or not engaging, not having skin in the game and entering these fields and changing. So that's really part of the motivation, that I want everybody to have skin in the game and talk about like, I think this is actually reflective of a lot of things in general and what we think of, like the conversations we have in law school and otherwise, like in other fields of like, when we critique, what happens next? And for me, it's always, well, we have to think about comparatively, what's the alternative? What do we do? Are we gonna be inside the conversation or just from the outside? And I always want to be, part of also thinking of a solution and changes. So that's really, I think that the same thing I can answer with like what happens when, and I just described it, what happens when we're just fearing, then we actually, ironically and paradoxically, we're just allowing. I mean, the technology is forging forward. Like that's the nature of technology. That's the nature of automation. Like, we're not going to ban facial recognition. It's just not going to happen. It's out there. So we need to think about uses and misuses, not like about not having the technology, not developing it. That's and from the policy perspective, like collecting data, I think we're at the point where there's so much data, we need to use it for good. I also want to say again, just one more. If it's not clear from what I said up to now, I don't think I really highlighted this. When we're not collecting data, there's this assumption that data collection it's not only that it's like scary and it's like surveillance, but it will have a disproportionate harm on the more vulnerable. And I actually highlight many ways in which that's exactly the mistaken. It's just incorrect that the exclusion will be patterned in a way that replicates harms, and you said this, it's just like gonna replicate the harm of sometimes, but a lot of times we need to understand that it's actually the people that are in the edges of data, or under the radar, in places where I want us to think actually, again, in a more balanced way about all the harms of not having digital access and not having digital literacy. And we don't think about it because we're all with our iPhones here, but it's as big a problem, the fact that there are millions of people who don't have that digital footprint, and all sorts of decisions about infrastructure, investment, resourcing, exchanges don't take them into account, and health and and medicine, and so that it's equally important to understand the harms of not collecting and not having access and not being part of the conversation.
I really like the talk, your book. I'm excited to read it. Thank you so much for coming. I was just wondering, you mentioned in terms of regulation and this nuance, you talked about public agencies, you talked about the government. What is the role of the courtroom? Like, should we be punishing abusers? Should we be giving immunity to those who are using it for good? Like, how do you incentivize people to use this technology, but at the same time regulate it from a legal perspective?
Yeah. So it really will depend on a lot of context. So I give an example of a judge looking at a program like Compass that had a lot of negative publicity. It's a program that, like, an algorithm that decides about sentencing and early release, bail release. And there were, again, like the media, I actually was just on the phone with a reporter who's featuring the book, The Wired, and I keep hearing, like, I'm like, why are you only highlighting like the fails? And they're like, well, it bleeds, it reads, right? Like, that's the lens that they have. It's a problem. So the courts also are, I think, are really, it's on them not to buy into just an absolutism, like finding that maybe the Compass or another program is, when you're asking like what should be the liability of a harm, like if it's uneven in terms of racial outcomes. First of all, we need not an absolute lens, but not a double standard. Similarly, like with a health app, like if an algorithm is not as accurate for every identity that we deploy it on, what we need to have is a standard of care of, like, how is it relative to other ways that we're screening and making decisions. We need the same principles if we want equality, we need to, agree as a society of, what are the remedies when not, and how do we move it forward. But in this case, there's like a Wisconsin court that I talk about where what it said about Compass is, okay, you can use it, but as long as the final decision maker is a human. And you see similar things with like the FDA approving like maybe a bot surgeon or and what I argue, and I actually want to do more research on this, I do behavioral policy research in collaboration with behavioral economists, and we're starting these new projects of like, how do we actually create more rationality in how we interact with bots, and when is it actually not a good standard of care or not a good practice to actually inject the human decision making at the last minute or the riskiest minute, like actually the EU is thinking about. So I think we all need to be more educated and make more rational decisions about, what is it actually doing and how do we regulate it.
So I see that there are more questions, but our time is about to come to a close. And I know some people have classes and some people probably need to come into this room and space. So
I want to hear all these
yes,
questions.
but we probably have a few minutes after we formally close, but I don't want you to miss out on a formal closure. So I just want to thank you for coming and for this really useful blueprint of where when people are actually designing uses of technology going forward and platforms that they should really incorporate into their design features, and maybe some people in the room will be advising people to be able to take your ideas and implement them. So I want to thank you for your work and sharing. Yes. Well, maybe some people have to leave, but
How about you ask a couple of questions without me responding? Yeah, go ahead.
So when you talk about the standard of care and like still making room for equality, I'm thinking about like due process concerns, because when you have like this automated technology, a lot of times I guess there's probably a trade secret of an algorithm, and there have been instances in court where people have tried to contest this sentencing that was based on an algorithm, and then it's like, no, this is a trade secret, it cannot be disclosed, so you can't really interrogate that.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and yeah, we can talk more about trade secrecy and like that balance. Yeah.
I had a question about what I hope to bring you back on your discussion of healthcare and the impact of healthcare technologies on quality of outcomes. So it's my understanding that advances in medical technology have actually been part of the driver of the increase in costs of healthcare, and in a country where a massive portion of the population is either uninsured or underinsured. That seems to be certainly advancing positive outcomes in healthcare, but only across the threshold of access, which is continuing to float upward, at least as I understand, precisely because of those technological advances. So. Could you touch back on like how it is that these technological advances, could or do increase equality in healthcare?
Right, and lower costs.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we should get the last
Yeah.
person. I don't
Yeah.
know when we get kicked
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
Others may know.
Yeah.
I guess I was just curious regarding how there are a lot of systems, particularly within the law, that like by their nature, and maybe not explicitly, but definitely are knowingly like built to discriminate. So as technology develops and there are instances where while innovation can produce a lot of good outcomes, there can also be like necessarily harms. So like, for instance, with the overturning of Dobbs, the fact that period tracking apps can be used to prosecute people who get abortions. How do we address those kinds of harms that like are going to come up because they come up in a system that like wants to discriminate against people?
Yeah, great, and I heard that you're actually having a
the
day
wide
about Dobbs.
reach of Dobbs.
Yeah,
impacts beyond
and I've been
abortion.
thinking about that too in relation to what I've been talking about with like wearable and apps that track us and geolocation, apps. And I'll just say very quickly that I think that we're putting too many of our eggs pun intended, I guess, in this lens of privacy rather than, like thinking about misuses and even with this question of reproductive justice, we're seeing that vulnerability of thinking about all of it as like a privacy right rather than many other rights that we need to be protective of, like health rights and economic rights and equality rights. But these are very hard questions that we have to answer as democratic countries about thinking about legitimate uses and illegitimate uses of our information. Yeah, last question.
I was just gonna say that I have class in here at 1:30, so we're probably fine.
Okay.
May I add, Christopher Yu, who's the founding director of CTIC, has been really committed on this One World Connected, Access for All, and working on gender equality and doing studies in Bangladesh and Rwanda, and just having a smart device, what that can do to alter a person's access to medicine and healthcare is astounding.
And economics, like financial
Right,
independence.
all along.
We have a conference tomorrow that Elizabeth is hosting on entrepreneurship, and I've done work with Fiverr and work even with micro entrepreneurship with Facebook, women who suddenly all around the world can offer services and have financial independence from their village or community, and then I talk about tracking and using satellite data to understand where to invest. The UN is doing that in schools that are not connected.
Yeah.
So all of this, thank you. I mean, that's exactly the point of what I answered before of we need to celebrate what connectivity and digital access is, the opportunities that they create at the same, on the same plane as these conversations of digitalization is gonna,
Destroy us.
destroy us.
There's so much good being done.
And that's exactly, and if we're not part of that conversation, we're only on the end. Again, the paradox is that it's just gonna be free flow, and we're not gonna invest and scale the things that are really meaningful to us and progressive.
And it's full catastrophe living, which is no place to be. Sorry, that's it for me.
So I think it's great because it opens up the conversation to a different aspect, an aspect that I'm not used to seeing, right? But there's also an inherent challenge here. And I look at it from three perspectives. Why do we do this? One is the privacy discussion, right? And you know that, and you know the Constitution and the fact we don't actually have good privacy protections here in the United States. So that's a huge issue. And then what do you do with the data and how do you protect people? And for that reason, the second, we also have protection on our health information. That's why Zebra, for example, one of these companies, radiology companies, I'm married to a radiologist, had to go to China to use the technology in the beginning in China because they didn't have as many barriers in terms of the laws. And so what we're seeing on the international level is that other areas are progressing more in AI than here in the United States because of the protections of the law. So it has two sides to every coin. And the third, so we have the privacy, we have of course the health laws, but I think the third is also the bias in the algorithm, right? For example, one of the scientists, I'm forgetting one of the large big tech companies, she's actually at Stanford, the one that does the honest algorithms in Stanford, and she quit. Was it Google? I don't remember where she quit because of
You're talking about Gebru?
Yes, right. And so we also need to take that in. Yes. And so that's the third aspect, and that is who's going to be in charge of who's going to put in what this algorithm is going to do, right? Yeah. And the bias that we know, and you started a conversation with that we can put in.
I just want to remind our illustrious author, congratulations on the book,
Thank
that
you.
we actually have quite a queue now building for you, so you have your choice of what you're going to respond to, I think, because we heard the question about trade secret being used as a shield or a defensive tactic. We had a question about the cost of healthcare and if technology is an increasing part of that, how to think about that with the costs and benefits and access. You answered, I think, the Dom's question, but you have a
My
robust.
understanding is that there are books outside, Orly will be there, and you can continue these conversations
Sign.
and sign books and stuff like that.
No big deal, just a few questions from the world, you know, yeah, problems of our time.
Yeah, these are great questions, thank